10 days later, she discovers his secret. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the dusty outskirts of the village, but for 12-year-old Nia, there was no warmth in the light. She stood barefoot on the old wooden floor of her grandmother's hut, dressed in a delicate white gown that had once belonged to someone else's daughter. Her veil itched. Her eyes were dry, not because she wasn't sad, but because her body had already run out of tears. Outside, a small crowd gathered. Women whispered. Men looked away. They all knew what was about to happen. She was about to marry Mr. Harold Grayson, a white man, almost 6 times her age, a 70-year-old stranger from another world, another country, another life. A man who barely spoke the local language. A man with silver hair, cold eyes, and a handshake that made her skin crawl. But he had money, and Nia's family had none. 2 weeks ago, her little brother fell ill, fever, chills, uncontrollable seizures. The clinic refused to admit him without payment. Her mother pleaded, begged, sold her sewing machine, her wedding ring, even Nia's school books, but it wasn't enough. That's when Harold came. He was staying in a private lodge in the mountains. An old American investor, they said. No one knew why he was in their region. He wasn't a missionary. He didn't speak of God or charity, but he had cash. And when he saw Nia walking barefoot through the market, buying medicine with coins, something in his gaze lingered. The next day, he showed up at their home with an offer, a bride price large enough to cover her brother's treatment and leave enough for rent, food, and clothing for a year. Her mother had refused, screamed, thrown things. But by nightfall, her brother's fever had worsened. They had no choice. And Nia, barely past childhood, had whispered the words, "I'll do it." The ceremony was small. Her grandmother tied a thin thread of beads around her neck. Harold, dressed in an expensive black suit, wore a subtle smile. He said nothing except yes when the elder asked if he took Nia as his wife. She said nothing at all. There was no kiss, just a nod, and then silence. That night, Nia sat on the edge of a clean bed in a strange guest house. Harold sat across from her, reading a book in a language she couldn't understand. He didn't come close, didn't touch her, simply handed her a bowl of soup and said, "You should eat." It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her. His voice was gentle, too gentle. It confused her. That night, he slept in the room next door, locking the door between them from his side. Nia stayed awake, holding a photo of her brother and wondering, what does he want from me if not what all the others whispered? The days that followed were the strangest of Nia's young life. She had expected cruelty, obedience, silence. But instead, Harold treated her like glass, not fragile out of pity, but valuable. He gave her a room of her own, brought her clean dresses in soft colors, served her tea at exactly 4:00 p.m. each day with honey and a small cookie wrapped in linen. He never touched her. He never raised his voice. He never looked at her like the others did. And that, somehow, made everything worse. She didn't know what to expect anymore. On the 3rd night, she peeked through the cracked door of the library. He was there again, like always, sitting in the same brown armchair, reading under the golden light of an old lamp. But this time, she saw something strange. He was staring into a mirror, not shaving, not brushing his hair, just staring. His face was tired, paler than usual. His lips trembled slightly, as if whispering something under his breath. Nia couldn't hear. She backed away. The next morning, Harold invited her to walk with him through the forest trail behind the lodge. He gave her boots, a scarf, a notebook. "You should write," he said, "even if it's just your thoughts." Nia squinted. "Why?" "Because stories make sense of things." He paused, then added quietly, "And I think you'll need that soon." The way he said it, as if he knew something she didn't, chilled her. By the 5th day, Nia noticed something else. Harold kept a room locked at the far end of the hallway, a heavy wooden door with a brass handle that didn't turn. She asked once. He smiled faintly. "Some doors aren't ready to open yet." But Nia wasn't a child anymore. She had been poor. She had seen death. She had said goodbye to innocence the day she wore a wedding dress, meant for someone 3 times her age. So that night, while Harold went into town, she picked the lock. Inside, she found a museum of secrets. Photographs lined the walls, children, dozens of them, all from different countries, some smiling, some not. Each had a date beneath their frame, Some dates had an X marked over them. Some had none. In the corner of the room, a wooden trunk. Inside it, more notebooks, letters. She pulled one out. Dear Marisol, you're probably 17 now. I still think about you, your laughter. I hope you kept the violin. I'm sorry I had to leave so soon. Another read. To Chica, the stars were always brightest when you sang. I hope you found your mother. I hope you still sing. And one more, fresh, barely a week old. To Nia, you don't know yet, but you will. I just hope I live long enough to see you smile for real. Her breath caught in her throat. She clutched the paper, eyes wide. Why was her name here? Why had he written her a goodbye letter before she even found it? She turned and nearly screamed. Harold stood in the doorway. He had returned early. His expression wasn't angry, just tired. I suppose it's time you knew, he said. Nia clutched the letter to her chest. Knew what? Harold leaned on the doorframe, exhaling heavily. That I didn't marry you for, me, he said. I married you for you. Nia stood frozen in the dimly lit room, still holding the letter he had written to her. The heavy air was filled with the scent of cedarwood, and something else faded memories. Harold stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind him. He didn't scold her for unlocking it. He didn't ask why. Instead, he walked to one of the photos on the wall, an image of a girl in a yellow dress, laughing, her arms flung wide under a blossom tree. Her name was Amina, he said quietly, from Morocco. She had a stutter, but when she read poetry, you'd swear God himself was speaking through her. He smiled, but it didn't last long. She died at 14. Malaria. Her village had no clean water. He pointed to another, Lina, from southern China, abandoned at birth. I paid for her surgeries. She wanted to become a nurse. She didn't make it either. Nia's mouth trembled. Are these all girls you married? No, he said firmly. They were all girls I found. Girls in danger. Girls being sold, forgotten, thrown away. I didn't marry any of them. He turned to face her fully. You're the first. Nia's eyes narrowed. Then why me? Harold walked to a small chair, easing himself into it with a sigh that sounded like it carried 70 years of regret. Because you were going to be married off anyway. You just didn't know it yet. Her heart dropped. He continued. I'd heard rumors in the village. A foreign businessman, Russian, had been buying wives under the table. Girls even younger than you. Your family was in debt. He was going to come to your mother with an offer. Nia stumbled back. You're lying. I wish I were. His voice cracked then, just slightly. I knew I had only two options. Let that man get to you first, or get there before him. Nia stared at the walls again. These weren't trophies. They were memorials. For the next hour, Harold told her everything, how he'd spent the last 20 years traveling the world, searching for vulnerable girls in desperate situations, orphans, street children, abandoned daughters, and doing what little he could. Sometimes he paid for their schooling. Sometimes he built wells in villages. Sometimes he adopted them legally. Other times, the system made it impossible. So he worked quietly, silently, off the record. Nia interrupted once. Why not use your money publicly? Build an organization, a school. You're rich, right? He smiled bitterly. I was. I sold most of it to fund these missions. But even money has limits when the law protects the powerful and punishes the poor. I learned early that the only way to reach girls like you, trapped in places the world forgot, was to go there myself. He looked her dead in the eye. I married you because that was the only way I could buy time to protect you, to give you a choice one you were never going to have. That night, Nia didn't sleep. She sat by her window, legs pulled to her chest, letter still in her hand. She thought about the life she almost lived, about the quiet American man who gave her a contract instead of a command, a pen instead of a cage, a choice instead of chains. And she realized something that made her chest ache. He didn't save her because he had to. He saved her because no one else would. The next morning, Harold wasn't at breakfast, nor at the garden bench, nor the library. Nia knocked on his bedroom door. No answer. Her hand trembled as she slowly opened it. He was there, lying peacefully on his side, still in his robe, pale, quiet, still gone. The doctors would later say it was congestive heart failure. He knew it was coming. That's why he'd been in her country. That's why he'd moved faster than usual. That's why he chose her. He'd been dying, and he didn't want to leave this world without giving one last girl a second chance. Inside his bedside drawer, Nia found a sealed envelope addressed to her. It read, "Nia, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but that's okay. I've lived my life. Now it's time for you to live yours. You'll find documents in the study. Your name is now on everything I own: land, savings, property. But the most important thing I leave you isn't money. It's freedom. Don't waste it." She wept for the first time, not out of fear, but out of love. The news of Harold Grayson's death spread fast. At first, it was quiet, a whisper among the lodge staff, a call to a lawyer in the city. Then it moved like fire through the village. People came to the front gate with flowers, with folded hands, with questions they didn't dare ask aloud. But what no one expected was the will. In the days that followed, a lawyer arrived in a black car, clutching a sealed portfolio. Inside was a handwritten testament, notarized and legally binding. Nia, barely 12 years old, was listed as Harold's sole heir. The villagers were stunned. Some whispered blessings. Others muttered curses. Her mother fainted in the yard. The elders met in secret. Children pointed from alleyways. How could that girl own the land now? She was just a poor nobody last week. He only married her to trick the system. It's witchcraft. But Nia said nothing. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't run. She just listened quietly, like Harold used to. Inside the lodge, she sat in his library alone, reading the same books he once read, eating the same soup he once made for her. The silence was loud, but she didn't mind it anymore. Harold's lawyer, a woman named Miss Carter, returned on the third day with a folder of transition documents. "There's enough money to last you until university and beyond," she said gently. "You don't have to decide anything now, but we'll need to name a legal guardian to oversee the estate until you're of age." Nia looked up. "Do I have to leave?" "No," Miss Carter replied, surprised. "This house is yours. Harold made it clear you can stay as long as you like." Nia sat back, the truth hitting her in waves. She had her own bed, her own books, her own keys, and now her own decisions. The first one she made shocked everyone. She reopened Harold's ledgers and directed Miss Carter to withdraw part of his remaining funds, not for herself, but for the children of the village. She ordered repairs for the clinic that once rejected her brother. She had a school built where she used to sell herbs in the dust. And she gave quiet instructions that any girl under the age of 14 could no longer be married by law, not without being reported to. A new registry managed from her estate. Some called her dangerous. Some called her cursed. But others, they started calling her something else: the girl who came back with fire. One afternoon, Nia walked alone to the cemetery at the edge of town. She carried a photo frame, Harold's favorite, the one of Amina under the blossom tree, and placed it beside his fresh stone. She whispered, "You weren't my husband. You were never even my father." She knelt, eyes full of quiet power. "You were my lighthouse." The wind moved through the trees. Weeks passed, then months. The lodge became a sanctuary, not just a home, a place where young girls could read, where they could sleep without fear, where they could heal. One girl, Zara, aged 9, had been rescued from a forced engagement. Another, Kemi, only 11, had been hiding from an abusive uncle. They found their way to Nia's gates, and Nia let them in, not as a queen, not as a savior, but as one of them. Then one rainy evening, Nia found a final envelope hidden inside one of Harold's book covers. It read, simply, "If they come for you, don't be afraid." She opened it slowly. Inside was a list: names, dates, addresses. Dozens of men, government officials, diplomats, criminals, some of them tied to child marriage, to trafficking, to the very underworld Harold had been quietly fighting for decades. He hadn't just saved girls. He'd been documenting the monsters. Nia's heart pounded. At the bottom of the letter, his last handwritten line: "Use your voice, Nia. Burn the dark. They can't kill light when it knows who it is." And that's when she made the second decision. She wouldn't just build homes. She'd build a movement. 1 year later, the world knew her name: Nia Grayson. No longer a child bride in a forgotten village, but a global voice for girls like herself. Her story had gone viral when a journalist from Lagos came to investigate rumors about a 12-year-old inheriting a foreign man's estate. What they found was more than headlines. They found a revolution. Nia had grown not just taller but stronger. Her voice was still soft, but now when she spoke, ministers listened. When she wrote, people shared. When she walked into a courtroom, traffickers flinched. With Harold's list and Miss Carter's help, Nia launched the Grayson Report, a detailed, terrifying dossier exposing international child marriage networks, officials who took bribes, and villages that auctioned daughters behind closed doors. Some people tried to silence her. They threatened, hacked, lied, but they were too late, because Harold hadn't just left her a house. He'd left her proof. He'd left her a plan. And most importantly, he'd left her an army of survivors, teachers, quiet donors from his past work, now inspired to speak up, stand tall, and fund her future. By age 14, Nia had spoken at the United Nations. By age 15, she'd helped change legislation in 3 African countries, making child marriage under 16 punishable by international law. And by 16, she had returned to her village not with guards or cameras, but alone. She stood in front of the school she had built, surrounded by girls laughing, learning, living. She smiled. I used to be afraid of silence, she told them. Now I know silence is where we grow strong. A girl raised her hand. Are you a queen now? Nia laughed. No, queens wear crowns. She tapped her temple. I carry fire. That night, she sat in Harold's old library, now filled with more books, more drawings, more letters from rescued girls. She lit a candle, wrote in her journal, and whispered to the night, I hope you see me now. A breeze moved through the room, and for just a second, she could have sworn she heard Harold's voice. I always did.